Hello, everyone, and welcome to Pop It Like It's Hot. My name is Chris, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Brian DeMars.
Hello.
Also with us today is a very special guest. You might have recently seen him taking first place in the Pauper Premiere League. His name is Chris Van Meter. Chris, it's a pleasure to have you on today.
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me.
Of course. So, first of all, I have to clear the air on one thing that has been on my mind. You went on record as saying the card you'd most like to see downshifted was Tybalt, Rakish Instigator.
Yep.
Is this a card that you think brings balance to the format, or is this the burn player inside of you trying to slide one by everybody?
So I think that would be like the Planeswalker that you would get the most impact at the least bustedness by shifting it down to a common. Like there isn't a good common spell for red to use to stop life gain from happening. You can stop damage from being prevented, but there isn't something to stop life gain from happening. And I think that would be a good type of thing to have in the format. Whether it needs to be on a Planeswalker or not, who knows? That's just kind of me hoping. But I think that Tybalt would be the one Planeswalker I think that could be a common, would see a lot of play, but not be busted.
Yeah, absolutely. If I'm not mistaken, there are literal 0 cards in Pauper that prevent life gain.
Mm-hmm.
And I almost feel like that would be like a more reasonable one than downshifting Skullcrack in a lot of ways, which a lot of people have kind of theorized might happen at some point.
Oh yeah, Skullcrack being downshifted would be insane. Like the burn deck is already very good. I don't think that it needs Skullcrack. at least Tybalt costs 3 mana and can be hit with Spell Pierce and Counterspell.
Yeah, Tybalt's raising the curve for burn, if anything. So, Chris, how long have you been playing Pauper?
So I've been playing Pauper kind of on and off for a little while before Modern Horizons was printed. But within the last probably 6 months or so, I've gotten really into it. Just so shortly before Modern Horizons got printed, I started a weekly stream for work for Card Kingdom on Mondays playing Pauper, just because we were starting to get some support with the PTQ that happened in LA, and now we're able to actually have PTQs for it online. So I'm not like an old head Pauper player. I haven't been playing forever, but I've really enjoyed jumping into it as of late, especially since I think Modern Horizons has kind of changed everything significantly.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So you started right before Modern Horizons. Were you playing in the blue-black Delver meta and that?
Yeah, I was playing still when Gush and Days were not banned.
Gotcha. So I guess compare what you think of the format now in kind of a post-sanctioning, post-blue ban, post-Modern Horizons world to kind of where it was when you started playing a little bit more regularly. You said 6 months ago.
Yeah, so I think that it's not perfect because I do still have some qualms for the format that I'm sure we can get into later. But I think that it's significantly better than what it was before. Like Gush and Days in particular are extremely egregious. When the format is kind of broken up into 2 spectrums, where one of them is trying to be as mana efficient and as velocity driven as possible, and the other is just trying to go completely over the top. When you have cards like Gush and Daze that can stop the players from being able to go over the top and interact with you, it just like the format wasn't very fun. Like I really wanted to play all these other decks. Like I wanted to play Elves, try out Burn. I wanted to play Boggles, Mono Black, different builds of Tron, but it just nothing could keep up with the Gush fuel decks that had Daze.
Yeah, definitely. We've seen especially Mono Green Stompy become much more of a force in the metagame now that they're able to safely play their 1s and 2 drops on curve.
Yeah, and it also like greatly reduces the threat of what Delver of Secrets is. So I think that Delver is like just the premier tempo threat when you think about the history of Magic. What is a card that is going to put pressure on and lean you into these play styles of not so much protect the queen, but just poke your opponent enough so that they can't do anything before you kill them with the Delver of Secrets. And losing those two cards has really shifted it away to now we're seeing that threat is core Skyfisher and Seeker of the Way as opposed to Delver of Secrets, which I think is better for the format as a whole overall. But I mean, Gush and Daze are just busted cards.
Yeah. No hate for Gitaxian Probe? You think it could be unbanned?
Actually, yeah, I think probe would be fine. Like I get wanting to get rid of it just so that you kind of start to get rid of like the hyper efficient free spells. But yeah, I don't think that it needed to go, but it makes sense considering that you're just kind of cutting off of these free spells.
Awesome. So I guess let's talk a little bit more about the metagame as a whole, as it stands now in a post-Modern Horizons world. You recently tweeted, and I'm going to hold you to this, that you are pretty sure that Burn is the best deck in Pauper, and nobody actually wants to admit it. Do you care to elaborate there? Because I don't think anybody else on the podcast would agree with that statement offhand.
Yeah, so Burn, I think, it's the best proactive deck that is able to shift its game plan when needed post-board. So in this world where you have decks just trying to dirtle with Arkham's Astrolabe and Core Skyfisher, Burn is just able to kill them on turn 3 sometimes. And there isn't another deck that has the ability to do that doesn't rely on like a linchpin card. Like Elves can potentially do that too, but if you kind of disrupt their first 1 or 2 plays, then that's not going to do anything. But there's just a lot of burn draws that kill on turn 3 that the Astrolabe decks can't really do anything about. And then you have on the other spectrum where people are trying to go under the Astrolabe decks, Burn matches up favorably against them, with the exception of Boggles. I think that Boggles is probably the only deck that is a really bad matchup for Burn when you're looking at that Astrolabe spectrum of trying to go under or dirtle. I also think that one of the reasons that Burn that a lot of people don't see Burn in the same light that I do is I think their mana bases are wrong. You should just be playing 17 Mountains, and you don't need to play Forgotten Cave at all. You want to cast all of your spells, and you already have cards that can give you some flood insurance with Fire Blast and Searing Blaze, playing those cards properly. In addition, I think that the sideboards need to be more streamlined. A lot of players I see with their Burn sideboards from their league results or the premier results, where they just have a ton of like ones and two ofs in their sideboard, where these cards like Molten Rain and Smash to Smithereens are better now than they have ever been in the format, and that's what you can lean on to try and disrupt these Astrolabe / Tron decks. And I even like using Molten Rain against Mono Black to try and push them off a turn from playing Grey Merchant, which is the only card that can beat you, really.
Yeah, definitely. That's interesting. So you're advocating more 4-ofs in the Burn sideboard to just because you're going to have different answers for different matchups, so you just want to maximize your chance of drawing those?
Yes, and I also I think that Pyroblast is just not a card that you need to play. Like the blue cards are not, that's not the axis that you want to be fighting the blue decks on. And I would just like much rather, I'm just very happy with my current sideboard, which is 4 Smash, 4 Molten Rain, 3 Firebrand Archer, 2 Electricity, and 2 Martyr of Ashes. I think Firebrand Archer is way better than Pyroblast against the blue decks.
Interesting, and I'd be very interested to get your Burn deck list, assuming it hasn't, or assuming that it has changed since the PPL.
No, it is literally exactly the same with the Pauper Premiere League, and I'm something like I have 2 5-0s and a 4-1 in the last 3 leagues that I played with it.
Wow, we're gonna make sure to post that deck list in the show notes for our listeners if they want to give it a try. Although, as somebody who hates playing against Burn, I really hope you don't. So, all right, we can establish for the purposes of this conversation that Burn is the best deck in Pauper. How does the rest of the metagame shake out in your estimation?
So, I think that by best deck, I mean it's just well positioned in a lot of metas, but I think that there are a lot of like tier 1 or top tier decks in Pauper. So I think that Burn is very good. I think that the Snow, Astrolabe, Tron decks that don't have Core Skyfisher are very good. I actually think that the Bant Ephemerate deck is very good too.
Are we talking about the deck with the Coiling Oracles and
Temporal Springlock? Yeah.
Temporal Spring, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I really like that deck. And I think that Boggles is actually in a very good spot in the format, but I'm unsure what the correct build is for it, since that deck tends to lose to itself more than basically anything else in the format.
Yeah, definitely. That or Infect. I've been playing a lot of Infect recently, and it seems to kill itself pretty regularly.
And then once you get past those, that and like the Jeskai Astrolabe decks, although I feel like those decks tend to lose to the proactive decks when they don't draw like 2 pieces of interaction, Lightning Bolt / Scred. So I kind of want to, if I were to play a Jeskai Astrolabe deck, I certainly would have 4 Scred, 4 Bolt. I notice a lot of people tend to trim on them, whether 4-3 or 4-2. I think 4-4 is proper. Once you get past that, I think that like Elves and Mono Black are always going to be decent choices. But I think if I had like a Pauper tournament to play in, I would play Burn. Like there was a big Pauper event, 6-round tournament, Rags to Riches here last weekend after I won the PPL. I played Burn and ended up misplaying and losing in the top 4. But yeah, I think that Burn is a great choice.
You mentioned Mono Black. Brian, you're a Mono Black player. Where do you think it stands in the meta currently? Is it a viable option?
I think it's definitely a viable option. It's just, I think it's like a tier below, like the 3 or 4 best possible deck choices. I think that like you just wind up with more favorable matchups when you gravitate towards the, like Chris was saying, Burn or Tron, or Jeskai. I think that those decks just give you a better shot of winning more games because they have more favorable matchups.
Yeah, I agree with that. But I do think that Mono Black has more like landslide matchups, which is the reason why it was one of the decks that I picked towards the end here in the Premier League. Because there's a chance that if you get paired up against something like Elves or just a Slivers deck or something like that, Mono Black will just steamroll them.
Definitely agree with that.
So let's talk about the PPL. You've brought it up a few times now. I'm sitting down right now with both sides of the semifinal matchup. So I'd like to hear from both of you, what sort of thought and preparation went into that match? Our topic for the week is choosing a deck for the meta and tournament preparation. So I'd love to get your thoughts on what you did for the semifinals and Chris, for you, the finals.
Sure.
You want to go first, Chris?
Yeah, I can go first.
Okay.
So I knew that I was going to have Burn in both my deck lineups for the semifinals and the finals. And I actually like putting Burn second, with Boggles being the only really bad matchup. I felt like just for some reason, if anybody was going to bring Boggles, it would be their first deck and not their second deck. So that's why I put Burn in my second slot. And I really wanted to, because of how many people have been playing Stompy, I put Mono Black in my first spot against Brian, because I felt like there was the potential that he would bring a Stompy deck first again, and I wanted to be on Mono Black against the Stompy deck. And then I just didn't really care what he had as the second deck. I was just going to bring Burn regardless.
Well, you took Elves in your first spot.
Elves, sorry. I wanted to be on Elves against a creature deck. I thought that you would have a creature deck first. Then I had Mono Black in the finals.
And then Brian, go ahead. Yeah, for you.
Yeah, so I figured one of Chris's decks would definitely be Burn because he played it so much in the league and had a lot of success. So I actually built like a Burn deck that was kind of like hedging towards beating another Burn deck. So like I cut like what I thought were like the worst like 12 cards in the Burn matchup for game 1, and I just played like Burning Tree Shaman, Keldon Marauders, and Orcish Hellraisers in the main. So I actually was trying to match up my red deck, like basically a pre-sideboarded red deck against your red deck, which I thought was like kind of an interesting like little thing, like dynamic going on within a league, is that you can actually prepare for, you know, specifically the player as opposed to like the metagame in general. Like I assume that was like kind of the same line of thinking with taking elves, assuming I would have a stompy deck.
Yeah, it certainly was more of a showcase of the format and like trying to pick decks that you think would line up well against your opponent, especially at that point, like because we have the previous data as far as like what decks people have been leaning towards. So like I went with elves because I was hoping it would be up against the creature deck, but I'm also pretty confident with the elves matchup against Tron, since looking at the results as of lately, people have been shaving Stonehorn because it's so bad in the mirror and against the other Astrolabe decks.
Awesome.
But I really did like the red deck that you brought with the creature base trying to be more along slide, just kind of like a hybrid of the Stompy deck and the Burn deck. I thought it was really interesting, and I felt like I got really lucky in our games to win those games. There were quite a few draws that you could have made that would have turned the tide, and like any explosive start with Burning Tree Emissary would have been very tough for the decks that I picked to catch back up.
Yeah, I had some rough draws in particularly the first matchup with the burn deck. I kept the first one I kept a one lander on the draw. There was like basically the nut. I felt like if I had like basically 3 draw steps realistically to hit a land to be in great shape. And I did add a land. I played 18 lands in the deck because it was a little bit more geared towards creatures, and I felt like making land drops was a little bit more important. But I definitely bricked that one. And then the second one was really weird. I mulliganed a really, really good 6. And I had a 2-lander with 2 Searing Blazes, so it's like I really hope I draw a 3rd land, and then I actually just ripped 5 lands in a row.
Yeah,
so I
remember you flooded out pretty hard that game.
But that's just magic. That happens sometimes.
Yep.
So what did you guys think of that 2-deck system that they ran in the playoffs? Were you fans of it, or is there a different way you would do it next time?
I really liked it. I thought it was really cool and allowed us, the kind of flexibility to showcase a few different decks. Also, it kind of helps. It just gives you more flexibility to change things up and maybe mask some of the stuff that you would be playing. I feel like it could have been a little better if archetypes were like if we knew archetypes but not exact 75s, because then that would give you even more freedom to be a little tricky. But I really liked it. It kind of forces us to try and play more, even though you didn't have to. Like I could have just brought Just Burn and played Burn for all 3 of my matches.
I considered taking like two different builds of Tron that sort of hedged different ways. But I decided that was kind of lame, so I took like 2 actual decks. The one thing that I would have preferred is if instead of just playing like best of 3, it would have been best of 5 for the semis, and instead of like the matches being like you could take whatever you wanted, that you actually played a round robin of all of the possible matchups.
Oh, that would have been cool.
So like that way we would have, because like the way it shook out, like I would have much rather played my burn deck against your burn deck and then the Tron deck against the elves deck.
Yeah.
So like if we would have played all 4, I think it would have it put a lot of importance on which deck was in which spot, and that's like kind of a little bit random. Like if I would have just flipped my decks, like I would have had, I think, like considerably different different equity in my matchups. So I think that like if we would have played all four of the possible matchups, and then for the last one, if it goes to the 5th, then like you can kind of pick whatever deck you want to take for like in the last one. That was like the only thing. But being that they, it's the first time, I thought the tournament was like pretty excellently formatted and a lot of fun. And I definitely liked being able to like showcase how, players picking two different decks and playing two different styles of decks and stuff, showing off the range. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And a good example of how the way we did it could not work is like in the finals against Adam, like one of the decks he had picked was the inside out combo that some people have been playing, and that deck is just atrocious. And like I beat it, and he was just gonna play the Jeskai deck for all three of the remaining matches, just because it's just like way better than that other deck. So I really like if it would have just been, kind of a round robin, so you get to see all the different matchups. That would have been cool.
Yeah, we interviewed Paulo Cabral, the guy who's been innovating the whiteout tribe deck that Adam played in the finals. And it's been iterated a few times since Adam got his list, and it's been putting up some results lately. I think the deck has legs.
I've tried it, and it felt so bad. It felt like I was such a dog against like the Astrolabe Seeker the way decks, just because like you're kind of capped on how much damage you can do, and those decks are able to interact with you, and Seeker puts them out of range of your combo.
Yeah. The other thing about can I get one last thing in about the previous point? The other thing that I was very aware of with the two deck system was that you really could not take two decks that had a bad matchup against the same deck, because if you did, your opponent could potentially run it 4 times in a row and just force you to play bad matchups either way. So it was like you needed to make sure that both of your decks covered like every specific deck, as far as like at least having a medium matchup, because like you really didn't want to get in a situation where it's like I have 2 decks that lose to mono black, and then my opponent's going to play mono black 4 times in a row. So
that's a good point too.
Yeah. But if you go round robin, then it's like, well, the mono black's going to get its, pound of flesh. He's going to play it 3 times, but it's not 4 times. So that was my line there.
Yeah, I think that's certainly some good feedback that we can give Alex and Kendra. I'm assuming they're going to try and do a season 2. We'll see.
Yeah, I would assume after the popularity of season 1, I can't see why they wouldn't. And we were considering our own sort of Pauper League. It's sort of in the very elementary stages, so I'm taking all this feedback to heart as well. That said, nice. We talked about the 2-deck format in the playoffs and what your thoughts were on that, but I'm interested to hear your thoughts on the overall structure of the PPL. What were some of your favorite parts of it? And going into, a season 2, what would you change?
So I think that I would like to have it be a little more variety on who we play. So like, even though we were split up into pods and it was all round robin, like there was a person that was in both of the pods that I played. So I kind of wish that wouldn't have happened. But other than that, I really like the Super League formula that you use, where you have like a host and then you have people kind of rotating in that are doing commentary. So that gives you some perspective, since they're actually competing, as well as, you would hope that they would have some insight into the format, since you chose them to be in the league, so they can help out with the commentary with color and strategy. So I really like the Premier League formula.
I felt the same way. Thought it was just an absolutely fantastic experience. I mean, I would put it in like my top 5 favorite Magic experiences, and that was one of the reasons I kind of
That's high praise.
Yeah, I mean, I've actually won stuff before. Like this meant a lot to me. Like I really enjoyed this. This was really fun. But yeah, that was sort of the idea of we should just do I got to the point where I could see the league was ending, and I was just gonna have this void in my life of getting to play this league structure of Magic. I just think it's so much fun to know who you're gonna play against. You can you can kind of metagame for them, and you're playing this other game of Magic. I just thought it was really cool.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, we talked about mono black control and how maybe it doesn't line up great against the Magic Online League metagame, for instance, but there are situations where it's the absolute best deck you can be playing, and something like the Pauper Premiere League gives it a chance to shine in those situations.
Yep.
Yeah, you don't have to compete with everybody playing Magic everywhere in the entire world. It's like it's these 12 people. Like we're playing Magic together, and at the end, like one of us is going to be victorious. So it's like you're trying to like outplay 12 people instead of just like this abstract metagame.
Yeah, that's why I've always really liked the like small invitational style tournaments. It ends up being way different and just a better. Well, I don't want to say overall better, but it's always just like a different and enjoyable experience.
It reminded me a lot of like my earliest days playing Magic, which were I would play Vintage up at the local game store, and it was the same group of 20 guys that showed up every single week, and it was like I'm not chasing pro points, I'm not like trying to qualify for this or that. It's like I want to beat Biller and Franklin and Shaman Ben, like every week. Like we're showing up with our best stuff, competing against one another. And I thought that was like a really cool aspect that is present in like playing in one of these extended 8-week leagues with other people that just doesn't really exist in any sort of other way that an average Magic player can really encounter.
Yeah.
For the most part.
Yeah, that's really incredible insight actually coming from you guys. So kind of getting off the PPL subject, our listeners prior to this have been listening to us talk about preparing for tournaments and selecting the best deck for an expected meta. Kyle Bogamus had an article where he says, when there's a deck with a target on its head, I want to play a strategy that gets to ignore the hate and have a passable matchup against the boogeyman. And that it's important to evaluate the other decks with natural advantages against the boogeyman deck. So I would present to you guys, how does that manifest itself in Pauper? For instance, we just had an MCQ online. How would you approach selecting a deck for a metagame like that?
That's a very good question. So I would sit down, like taking my personal burn bias out, like throwing that out. I think that like the expected meta is you're going to be looking at the majority of the time you're going to play against a Jeskai / 4-color Astrolabe deck and a Tron Astrolabe deck, and the only type of hate to try and combat those decks is Smash to Smithereens sometimes, Molten Rain sometimes, and decks that are going to prey on them like Elves or Boggles or things of that nature. So looking at that, I would want to have a deck that has a passable matchup against the Jeskai, Astrolabe, and the Tron decks, but also not get smeared by the decks that are going to try and prey on the Jeskai, Astrolabe decks and the Tron decks.
And is there a deck you think that kind of fits that mold? Or I guess if that deck was out there, people would be all over it. It seems to be Boggles recently.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the Boggles has too high of a fail rate for me to take that into a large tournament, which is why I kind of settle on Burn, because I think that Burn is passable against the Tron and the Jeskai Astrolabe decks. I think that it beats Elves, it beats like the random creature / beatdown decks, and you can beat Boggles when things line up properly.
Yeah. When they line up properly.
Which you did in the semis, or the round before.
I did.
Boggles. Yep.
Awesome. Well, we're coming a little close on our time here. Chris, I did want to give you the opportunity, any parting thoughts, anything you want to let our listeners know about?
So Pauper is great. You should play it, especially online. It's so inexpensive to get in. You could just go pick any deck list from a league and whatnot, and you're looking at probably less than $40. I just said forget it and bought all the stuff for the Burn deck because I'm partnered with Card Hoarder, so I just use them to borrow cards when I play on Magic Online. But I think that I've done well enough with the deck that I just kind of want to own it, and it was $13 is what it cost me to to get that burn deck. Thankfully, I already had the 17 mountains. So that's pretty inexpensive. I do stream Pauper every Monday at 11:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time at twitch.tv/card_kingdom. So you can come and check that out. And I do think that the format is in a good spot. Like, there's been a lot of talk about, Astrolabe's too powerful, maybe it needs to be banned, so on and so forth. I don't think that that's true. I think that we're starting now to see things kind of shake out where Astrolabe is going to fit in these spots with many different decks, and I don't think that any of them are going to be super oppressive. If there were any cards that I felt were a problem in the format, I think that Ephemerate and Ghostly Flicker are the two that I would look at. Ephemerate, I'm still amazed that card is a common and not an uncommon. It's absolutely insane.
Super busted.
Yeah, and I actually think that of the Astrolabe stuff that's happening, I think that Core Skyfisher may be a little more problematic than Arkham's Astrolabe. But overall, I think the format's in a pretty good spot, and you just need to try new and different things.
Awesome. Well, Chris, thank you for joining us. It was a real pleasure. I had a lot of fun in this conversation. I think our listeners are going to like it a lot. We're going to make sure to include the links to all of your social media, make sure they're able to follow you on Twitch, something I'm certainly going to be doing moving forward. So thanks again for being on, and we hope to talk to you again in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime.
All right. Have a good one.